Thanks so much for having me, and I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Mitch Canner, who was supposed to be up here with us, couldn't make it, health, and so forth. So I'd certainly like to say thank you to him. So I start with a picture of my son. This is Parker. This is when he was 3 months old. He's now a year old. And the reason I have this picture up here is as I was thinking about coming to this event, I was thinking about how jealous I was of him. And I was jealous of him because he's going to live in a world where all of the problems we're trying to figure out, or most of the problems we're trying to figure out in this industry, are going to be fixed. We're not going to be talking about social versus digital versus TV. We're not going to be talking about paid, earned, and owned. A bunch of these problems are going to be sorted out. And so as I thought about that, I think about a world where he doesn't get marketed to, and he's in a world where we actually function as an industry. And so that's what I'm excited about. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So as we think about content, that content is king. And so brands have decided that they're going to get back involved earlier in the process. And so getting involved earlier in the process means they're going to start acting like venture capitalists. They're going to get involved at the very nascent stage of content. So what does this mean? This means that they're going to go out and they're going to engage with partners and they're going to ask you to develop content. And that content that they ask you to develop, they're going to ask to be allowed to distribute that wherever they choose. And so it becomes really interesting, right? So as content becomes king again, it becomes the connective tissue, it becomes the thing that makes media work again. And we're seeing, a number of companies enter into it. So we've got, P&G is going back to their days when they did things like the People's Choice Awards, and they're starting to invest very early again. They're putting funds together to start that. You've got companies like Electus that are doing similar things as well. So as content becomes that connective tissue, it allows us to rethink what are the other elements of media that make sense? What are the other elements of media that are going to drive us in a certain direction? They'll take more risk, right? They're willing to sit at the table and say, you know what, if I invest in this content early enough, it's going to become a revenue stream for me. It's not just going to be the place that represents, I put my brand in and it's part of, I do an integration or something along those lines. It's no, I own this. So all of a sudden, I've decided that piece of content is at my destination. I've decided that piece of content is going to get licensed out to someone else. And when I license it, maybe to even another brand, well, now it becomes a revenue stream. And so that's what's happening with content as we think about it as a business. So one of the next trends around as we think about the content category is in connection with publishers. I've had a number of conversations over the last couple of days, and it was been with, I'll describe it as the big portals, so the Yahoos of the world, the MSNs, the AOLs. And as they think about content, that world has been, let me create really cool, rich content, and let me take that content and, you're going to pay me for it, and we're going to distribute it across our great platform. Well, I think gone is that world. I think now brands are saying, we're going to come to you, and we don't care who you are in reality, but you're going to probably be a publisher. And we're going to say to you, we want the best content in the world, because the best content in the world is going to drive awareness of our brand, it's going to drive connectivity to our brand, and it's going to drive sales. And so they may go to I'll choose Yahoo, they may go to a Yahoo and say, we're looking for killer content. And Yahoo has to be comfortable enough to say, cool. And we're fine with you not distributing that content on our destination. Can you imagine that world, right? Where all of a sudden these people that, the way that money is made and the way that ecosystem operates is one in which, hey, we're going to do this content piece and it's going to live on our destination. We're going to drive traffic towards it. You're going to pay us for advertising. But no, it's going to be a different ecosystem. So why should you as a publisher be willing to do that? You'll be willing to do that because of data, right? Publishers have the keys, right? They haven't had it in the past because it's been too small. But now all of a sudden, a brand looks at a publisher, let's say someone like Facebook, and says, you have a wealth of knowledge. You have such a wealth of knowledge that I would love to gain access to that, because it doesn't just inform things that I think about when it comes to how many media dollars do I spend. It comes to think about, how do I take that and you now can help me understand other aspects of my business. you have such a wealth of knowledge and such a wealth of insight that I'm willing to pay you exponentially for it. The old world, right, or the current world and the current state is most of that is aggregated by agencies, right, because they've had the access points to publishers. But all of a sudden, as publishers grow, what's going to happen is they're going to figure out that, hey, we actually have access to this information that's more valuable than maybe a media transaction. And so that's the shift of power that's going to take place in the industry as a whole. And so we have to figure out how we play in that environment. So what this allows to happen when we think about the trends that are happening in content, the trends that are then happening in the environment as far as who operates in the ecosystem and who owns, it ultimately creates the brand becoming a network. And as the brand becomes a network, as we think about, hey, we have access to massive amounts of individuals. We have TV watching audiences, and some, they exist at a Facebook destination, but it's the size of a network. And how we actually trade information, how we share with them, how we exist in the same environment as our consumers, that's what's happening. So as we think about the brand as a network, right, as the brand is ultimately being that set of power and that set of relationships with the consumer, and the consumer's going to grow our brand, that's where we see value. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian Wallace. He's going to talk in more detail about our brands being a network, and he's going to talk specifically about Research in Motion and how they've been able to accomplish that.
Good morning. Actually, before I get into the presentation, I do want to quickly mention the real reason why we put a baby picture of Dan's son up there. I know a lot of people in the audience are probably going to be tweeting about our presentation. Some of you guys might be critical of what we're saying or want to attack what we're saying, but just remember, in doing so, you're actually attacking that poor little baby. As part of our presentation. So really, just a word of warning, or caution on that. Anyway, so as this slide suggests, I want to talk about the birth of a network here. And really what I'm talking about here is a content network, and the BlackBerry Content Network. Now, I'm not talking about the device network that we all know and love. I'm talking about a content network that we created that I think is pretty significant and has lots of implications and challenges that it's created for RIM that I think are the same implications and challenges for our industry. Not only brands, but media agencies and content publishers. So I want to walk you through basically the birth of this network and how it started. So I'll start with TV. This is a show in North America called Glee. I'm showing Glee because if you're in North America, you're either advertising on Glee, planning on advertising on Glee, or you wish you could afford to advertise on Glee. It's a very insanely popular show. I don't know if you get it here in Europe. I've personally never seen it, but I hear it's very good. We advertise a lot on it. But really what this represents is the traditional way brands like RIM have created networks to consumers. Now, more specifically, this is just buying network time on other companies' networks. And even more specific than that, you're just buying really a proxy for eyeballs in this case, because we don't really actually know how many people are watching those shows. We have estimates. More specifically than that, we don't really know how many people actually see our ads. We see estimates on how many people see those ads. But traditionally, this is how it's built. Then, as we all know, the web came along, and like every other brand, RIM advertised online. And this had a very fundamental impact to our company, just like it's probably impacted all your organizations. First of all, we had direct feedback. It was measurable. And it wasn't a proxy for eyeballs. It was actual behaviors that we could track. Not only that, it was insanely efficient. I don't know if you guys can see the numbers at the bottom, but to reach the same amount of people in television as we can for digital is 6x the cost. Now, I don't know how this transformed your organizations, but it had a profound transformation within RIM. Within a year and a half, we went from 2% of our media being dedicated to digital to over 50% of our media being digital. And that was over 2 years ago. So again, significant impact. So as a result of that, we've increased our investment in terms of our capabilities online. This helped expand what's traditionally called the owned media channel. And an owned media channel yesterday meant you had a corporate website. And that wasn't terribly interesting or really impactful to the business. But where that's really changed in the last year or two is with the growth of third-party sites that host branded content. And specifically what I'm talking about here is sites like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter, et cetera. And we started to invest heavily in these sites in the last year and a half. And as a result, they've grown much faster than we thought. So, to illustrate, today alone, we'll reach 60 million people via this channel. Now, that's astounding to me. And you think, wow, that's an amazing opportunity for RIM. And it is, but it also created these significant challenges for us that we've yet to, quite frankly, completely overcome. One of which was, this is a 24/7 multi-channel global channel network that has multiple channels and is constantly demanding a refresh in content. Now, I don't know what your companies are like, but I work for a tech company that's IP-based. We're actually built not to talk to the outside world. I have buildings of lawyers that are outside the windows of my office, all dedicated to prevent me from talking to the outside world. It makes a lot of sense because, again, we're trying to protect our IP, but it's just not in our DNA to create lots and lots of content that's not necessarily product-specific that makes this channel interesting to people. So we did what any company probably tried to do here. We tried to start building teams to build out content and compelling content for this channel. But again, I launched 4 or 5 products a year. It wasn't enough content to fill this channel, this always-on 24/7 channel. So then what we did is we went to content publishers, and content publishers do what content publishers do. They wanted to charge you large sums of money for their content. That too was not a scalable solution. We struck deals with Disney, we struck deals with other companies, but again, it wasn't enough to fill this channel. So we're sitting there, I remember this on a Saturday on my deck. I'm sitting there talking to a friend about this, going, I had this massive network. So I thought I was creating websites to host marketing content for BlackBerry, and quite by accident, we created this network that reaches 60 million people, and I don't have anything to say to these people. I'm desperate for content. His idea was, why don't you go talk to the content creators themselves? You've got a network, they've got content in search of a network, go and see if you can strike a deal with these guys. So it was really interesting. Immediately, when you started having conversations with content creators, they understood what we were talking about. They understood us as a premium network. They didn't see us as a device manufacturer. They didn't see us as an advertiser or a sales guy. They understood us as a premium content network. And to a T, every content creator we talked to wanted to distribute their content on our network. And so increasingly, we had conversations not unlike what I imagine an NBC has with a content creator, or a Comcast has with a content, or AOL, or Yahoo in this case. And we started striking these deals. Most interesting, a lot of times, they just want to give us the content for free, because they just wanted their content to be seen on our premium network. So this solved a bunch of problems for us. It solved the problem of scale. I didn't need to create vast amounts of teams and resources within RIM that, quite frankly, we didn't have capabilities for to build out custom content to fill this channel. I could just strike deals with content creators to create content for this channel. And it allowed us to become content curators versus creators. It also was that aha moment where we realized, what we're building here is a network. We're actually building a network here. So the last layer of this network is what we call today social media or earned media. And as we know, this channel, this layer of channel of the network has its own unique challenges. Specifically because a lot of the media being generated isn't necessarily being generated by the brand, it's being generated by people talking about the brand. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's controllable, sometimes it's not. In this case, this is people talking about BlackBerry, what they like about BlackBerry, what they don't like about BlackBerry, applications, et cetera, that they wish they had. And we're a brand like any other brand in that we monitor these discussions for sentiment, et cetera. Dan Neely's company helps us mine this data to help inform our media planning, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and inform product development, et cetera. But when you see this as a network, you also see this layer as an opportunity to help syndicate and federate the content on the network for free, quite frankly. And I'll illustrate by example. So Facebook. We're a top 10 brand on Facebook. I think we have, 12 or 15 million fans. I always forget because we're growing so quickly. Most interesting, though, to me is we're the most penetrated brand on Facebook. So what does that mean? Facebook several months ago did a study for us where they did an analysis of our fan base, and we are basically 1 degree separated from over 400 million Facebook users because our fan base is the most connected. So, when you're viewing this as a network, I go, aha, I'm 1 degree separated from a reach of 400 million people. So increasingly, the kind of content we're curating, and Dan's helping us to identify this content, is meant to try to trigger the most sharing within that large network. When I go talk to content creators, I can say, not only do I have a literal network of several hundred million, I have a potential to expand that network reach to 400 million on Facebook if we get the content right and it's shared. So what does all this mean? How do we sum all this up? Well, essentially, everything I talked about is a content distribution network. It's not a marketing platform. It's not a bunch of websites. It's not just a Facebook page that we're trying to get lots of fans. It's a content network. And it's a big one, shockingly big. We're going to reach this year, through this content network, 1.5 billion people. Now, I'm pausing for dramatic effect. 1.5 billion people. And honestly, most of this was built by accident. So you start to do thought experiments on this. You go, okay, if this is a content network and we can reach 1.5 billion, what can we do with this? What are ways to monetize this? What if I charged content creators and publishers to distribute content on my network? What if I sold advertising? What are the e-commerce capabilities and the commerce capabilities? And probably 50 ideas that you guys all have that I'm not thinking of. Another interesting thought experiment we went through is, what if multiple brands got together? Because I imagine if we have a network size this large, a Coke, a Kraft, a Disney, et cetera, they also have very large networks, even larger than this, I imagine. They just might not be thinking about this. What if we all got together and connected our networks in some kind of branded content guild, say, and we sold advertising on that network? Or traded media in kind. So Disney, you can advertise on my network, we'll trade for me advertising on your network, et cetera. So you can imagine how all this plays out. So I think it has pretty significant implications for our entire industry. Not only brands, but media agencies, content publishers, and content creators. I don't have all the answers here. I'm posing a lot of questions. What I'm hoping for is to generate conversations with other brands and agencies and content publishers around this. Now, as interesting as all this is, I think this is going to be transformed yet again, and is currently being transformed yet again by mobile. Specifically, here's the example I'll use. This is Lisa. She's visiting New York from another country, and she's going about her day on the streets of New York. Now, the device she's carrying with her knows where she came from, knows where she's going, knows what she likes, knows what she doesn't like, and it's constantly updating itself in real time. So it's always serving her the most relevant, location-aware, and personalized content and offers, et cetera, to her. So everything she's getting is most relevant to her place in space and time. Now, what implications does this have for us as an industry when all devices are going to have this capability? I think it was Esther yesterday from AT&T showed a slide, and you can't just think of these devices as mobile devices. All devices that will distribute content will have this capability in the very near future. What implications does this have when we're tracking all this information as brands, connecting it all through a network that's all connected digitally to all these devices, and we're tracking all this activity? So again, I think it has significant implications for our industry as a whole. I think Dan's going to get up here and just talk briefly around some of the implications specific to media and media planning right now. And then we're going to get into a conversation with Greg about this. Thanks. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. So a couple of things that happen as a result of what Brian just talked about. The first is sequencing, and this is not too far from the words we used to call, flighting and so forth, but sequencing allows us to think about paid, earned, and owned media. And we think about those, as people like to talk about them as a combined thing today, or we're starting to do that. Reality is it's not. And so as we think about sequencing, it's when do we turn on and when do we turn off? Because being always on TV or always on digital may not be the right answer anymore. As we think about earned being that connective tissue and content being that connective tissue, we have to figure out how do we make sequencing really work, because that's what's going to make our media dollars more efficient. As we work with Research in Motion, we think about making that media spend way more efficient, right? We think about how do we go and sequence the right set of things in media so that we don't, we can't afford to outspend the entire ecosystem. So we have to figure out how to make those dollars work smarter. So sequencing is how we're doing that. And by looking at, the mass amounts of data that we have access to today, that's what allows us to get there. And so sequencing will become part of every single thing that every single company in this space does, both today and in the future. The next is a phrase that I like to use, and it's borrowed from a good friend of mine, John Lowell, who works at Starcom, and he uses the phrase minimal effective amount, and he and I have had a debate over what this is, and it's a set of language that we think about at Networked Insights, we think about with our clients, which basically says that if you invest $1 more than the minimal effective amount, then you've wasted that dollar. And so what will happen, and so this is procurement's best friend, right? Because they look at it and they say, okay, what is the minimal effective amount that you should be spending? And as you evaluate the various media plans that you have, and as we start using intelligence and insight and data, right, and real-time, fast analytics to start to describe, this is the value you should expect. If you spend any more than this amount, then you have spent too much. And so it takes us back to, John Wanamaker, right? 50% of it's wasted. We just don't know which 50%. Well, now we can actually start using data to say what is wasted and what is not. And so as we think about the minimal effective amount, that's the language that you're going to expect to hear from your CFO, because every time you deliver $10 million, $20 million, $30 million back to that person, you just gave them 10 cents of EPS, right? Which is the value proposition here. And so you're going to hear the same things from procurement. But that is a set of language in what you talk about and when you go and present and when you go and pitch. And as a brand, when you go and do the same things as far as ROI, this is the language we're going to be using. Then the last is media planning. I think about media planning, and I think about it, my background is I started a long time ago in the insurance industry, and I look at that industry and I was like, wow, this is really broken, and I went through a process of disintermediating it. And so then I look at this industry and I say, okay, media planning, it's really inefficient. There's so much stuff that happens in there that's driven by humans that could be driven by technology. There's so much stuff in there that's been built, and we've built large agencies around it to say, okay, this is the way the planning process will function. 80% of it's human today, probably 20% of it is driven by technology, but it's going to shift to that performance-based model, right? If you think about the buying platforms, et cetera, that's hyper efficient today, certainly in the digital space, less so in TV, but that'll figure itself out. But as we think about media planning, it's just become so painful. Right, we think about, as agencies they look at their cost structures and they're like, we have to figure out how to change this. So they're working on the planning process, right? They're working to innovate the planning process, and they're trying to get there. But ultimately, it will become a performance-based model. It'll become a model where you say, you know what, you can pay me 2% of media, but I will deliver you 5 times in return, and if I don't, I'll give you the money back. Right? And you're going to be able to do that because, again, you can predict using technology. It's too hard to do when so many humans are involved in the process. So we're going to see shifts that happen in that space. And we're starting to see it with various agencies that we work with, various clients that we work with, and various publishers that we work with. They're starting to think about a new way of this model taking form and taking place. As you think about Brian's numbers that he put up there before, and we think about conversion, which is ultimately resulting in revenue, that's the metric, right? So we need to push that into the planning process as well, rather than it just being in the buying function. So we're going to start with have a conversation, a couple of questions and so forth, and have a little chat about some of the other things that are going on. But as we do this, I come back to my son, Parker. So think about him as we're going through this process, and certainly as we, as we think about the shape of this space, and the fortune that he might have because we'll have figured this stuff out. Okay, thanks.